So what I thought I'd do a little bit tonight is give you a little background on who we are, what we're trying to do, let you hear from some of our law enforcement partners, whether it be the FBI, the ATF, what we can do to make your neighborhoods, your streets, your schools safe. So with that, let me give you a little background on the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's 2 districts in the state of Mississippi, north and north 45 counties. About 2 million of our 3 million residents are in the Southern District. And we have our main office here in Jackson, with our next office in Gulfport. And when I came in office in October, it's because of some other factors. For starters, Jackson is ranked, unfortunately, as the 7th deadliest city in the nation, based upon murders per 100,000 people. The violent crime rate in the city of Jackson is 200% higher than the rest of the state of Mississippi, and 120% higher than the national average. The last statistics I saw from the Jackson Police Department at the end of July showed that we were already up to 51 murders at the end of July, whereas last year at the end of July, we only had 32 murders. So at this time last year, we're already up 60% increase in murders, based upon Jackson PD's numbers. I know you can't see that, but that's on the Jackson PD's Twitter account, which means if we stay on this pace, we're going to reach almost 90 murders this year in the city of Jackson. I read somewhere in 2016 we had 68 murders. That was the most we had in 10 years. Well, if we stay on this pace, we're shooting for almost 90. So, and one more thing I forgot to mention. One more thing we found when we started talking to patrolmen, we started talking to detectives. We started seeing when folks would be arrested locally by Jackson, we saw a disturbing trend and they were almost released immediately back on our streets. So those and many other factors are one reason we picked the city of Jackson to focus our resources. And let me back up before I get into the details of Project Eject. Eject stands for Empower Jackson, Expel Crime Together. But let me tell you a little bit about federal law enforcement. We have very limited jurisdiction in the United States Attorney's Office. We can't prosecute every crime that occurs in the city of Jackson. We have jurisdiction over carjackings. We have jurisdictions over business robberies. We have jurisdiction over felons in possessions of firearms, other illegal prohibited possessions of firearms. We have jurisdiction over drugs. We don't have jurisdiction on every single crime that occurs in the city of Jackson. So we're bringing everything that we do have and that limited jurisdiction to bear and try to help the citizens of Jackson and the residents of Mississippi. So there are 4 components to Project Eject that we came up with when we developed this. First and foremost is prosecution. That's who we are. That's what we do. Second is prevention. And I'll get into these a little deeper. The third is awareness. And the fourth is re-entry or rehabilitation. We've done this before. We've prosecuted cases before, but we have found that we can't prosecute our way out of the problem. And that's why we came up with other components to try to do a multidisciplinary, holistic approach to fighting crime in the city of Jackson. But let's take these individually. Prosecution. When I got in here, based upon the things we'd seen and the experience we'd had, especially with JPD, I gave my federal prosecutors basically 5 guidelines. We're going to try to arrest these guys who commit local federal crimes immediately. We're going to ask the court to detain these folks, because again, that was one thing we heard. They keep getting out right after they commit a crime, and they commit a crime again. Third, we moved to a plea deal where they would get back in the street just within a few weeks. Fourth, we would remind federal criminal defendants there's no parole in the federal system. We don't have parole in the federal system. And 5, we would recommend to the judge and the Bureau of Prisons ultimately makes this decision. We would recommend they serve their sentence outside the state of Mississippi. There's only one federal prison inside the state of Mississippi, it's in Yazoo City. I used to prosecute cases in Yazoo City. Well, by that I mean prisoners committing crime inside the prison. And what we saw in Yazoo, what we saw in other prisons around the state were prisoners would be sent to these local prisons and they would continue to operate their criminal organizations from behind bars. Whether it be a smuggled cell phone in or what have you, they continue to do this. And so we recommend that these individuals serve their sentence outside the state. And logistically, this is what it looks like. We have about 12 or more federal and state law enforcement officers. teaming up with the Jackson Police Department. And they team up with them where if JPD runs into someone who's committing a federal crime, they'll call out our guys and we'll respond and try to pick those up. And when they get to us, the U.S. Attorney's Office will process and prosecute those cases quickly in our office. And I'll tell you about the results at the end of the meeting. So that's the prosecution. The second is prevention. My predecessor, Greg Davis, was the U.S. Attorney. Actually, when I was still an assistant U.S. Attorney, he came up with this program called the LEAD program, Legal Enrichment Decision Making Program. And it was going into schools and just talking to kids through PowerPoint presentation, through real-world experiences of our prosecutors, our agents, about how their consequences to their actions, how their decisions every single day don't only affect them, it affects everybody around them. And so we've had great response to that. At the end of those presentations, we'll do what's called a pledge against gun violence. And all that is a pledge on the wall. Kids love to sign it, and they're pledging that they won't bring a gun to school, that they won't use a gun to resolve disputes or differences. And they'll actually discourage others from using guns to resolve their differences. And we've been getting great responses from the kids and from the students on that. The second is a book buddy program. We in the U.S. Attorney's Office are trying to figure out ways to get into our schools here in Jackson and try to not only help them in their education, but just give them love, show them we care. Especially in this day and age with law enforcement, we want the kids, we want everyone to know that we are doing this because this is a calling for us. That we want to make our communities, our city, our state better. And so we're going into the Jackson Public Schools, specifically Johnson Elementary, helping the third graders at that school read better. Before there's a high school mock trial program, my fellow prosecutors have been challenged to try to adopt Jackson Public Schools. And adopt them by coming up with teams within the high schools to compete in the Mississippi Bar's yearly high school mock trial competition. I can tell you, as a participant in this in the past, when I was a federal prosecutor, me and some others adopted Jim Hill High School.
I think people are educated enough to protect themselves. A lot of people have moved in situations of crime, and it's sadly because the exposures are a little bit too much. What they have, the exposures are too much. And my understanding is that we need more education for our residents, for the citizens of Jackson, of how we protect ourselves from the crimes. But I think also on the flip side, I have a question. What are you all doing as far as with persecution? Are you all, with a lot of the issues that we're facing today around criminal justice reform, how are you all being fair to those that you are persecuting? Because at the same time, you're still human beings, so I want to see that you all are still giving fair trial and also fair sentences to those that you persecute.
I appreciate the question. I would disagree a little bit. I wouldn't quite say what we're doing is persecuting the law. There have to be consequences. And so that's what we're trying to do is to step up and enforce the law. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Liz Grissom, and this is my church, so and I have a great community. Some of my neighbors are here, we all know each other, we talk to each other, we pick up trash. I mean, we have really worked hard, especially in this north part of Fondren, and the only part of Fondren that's in Ward 1. We have worked really hard to be connected and do the kinds of things you guys are talking about. And thank you. I don't disagree with anything you've said at all. I do have a question, though. This may be more related to Mr. Foote in the city, but we only have like 2 code enforcement officers, if I'm correct, and I'll be glad to be corrected. We only have 2 code enforcement officers for the entire city of Jackson. And we work really hard to keep our neighborhood a healthy, vibrant place that people want to live in. And when you have burned out houses in your neighborhood that have been there for 3 to 5 years, what happens is it attracts investors, absentee investors, and it just over time erodes your community. not trying to connect the two, I guess I just did, but, you know, if we offered a lot of money to buy a gun, like $1,000 or something really attractive like that, maybe we could get some of these guns off our street, and, you know, at least I feel like we tried. We tried to do something, and we may have saved a life.
I agree with everything that Liz Brister said. I also live in the neighborhood right down the street, not too far from here. So I echo what she said about the code violations and also about guns. I'm here today representing Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I'm the new legislative lead or leader for the Mississippi chapter of Moms Demand Action, and you can see several of us in our red t-shirts today. So what we are interested in is gun violence prevention. So we want to do whatever, gun violence prevention. Yeah, so what we want to do is to do whatever we can to stop gun violence. We don't necessarily endorse Project Eject. There may be some things that we don't support with Project Eject, but we do support gun violence prevention, and we have a research arm of our national organization, which is Everytown, which has focused on all kinds of gun violence prevention, including suicide by gun, guns in school and youth, and others going into schools and killing businesses outside of Mississippi. I have issues with that because that makes it difficult for people to be in contact with their families and to get other types of social support. I'm glad I got a.
We have a question up here at the front.
Okay. You don't have a question for me. Okay.
You got a hand raised back here, like a minute.
Okay. What?
Right after this lady.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ice.
Mr. Hurst, my name is Stacy Kirsten. My daughter was number 37 last year. My daughter was murdered on Fortification Street. Now, since then I've turned to terms some negatives and some positives, and I've gotten involved in this. I live in Rankin County. But I want to address two things, and I'm sure y'all want to agree with me. But one of the gentlemen that was involved in my daughter's murder had just been released from Parchment 30 days to the date that he was involved in my daughter's murder. So I think repeat offenders on felony charges is something that people really need to look at. His first conviction had actually been reduced from armed carjacking to simple carjacking. The other thing is the no bail. You know, one of the boys involved in my daughter's murder was let out by one of the judges, just walked out of jail. The family was not notified, which is an egregious against the victim's rights that's in the Mississippi State Constitution that nobody seems to want to address or acknowledge.
What about the victims of police terror?
Please don't interrupt. Please respect.
You know,
All the message.
Please.
the bail,
1 second.
I think bail should, you know, the punishment should fit the crime, and so should the bail. And there's obviously several things to consider when setting bail or denying. But as a parent,
Murderers cops get bail?
Sir, would you please?
as a parent, when I know that this person was involved, and I
they are sick, hurt people. It's the result of economic conditions very often. It's the result of a legacy of post-traumatic slave syndrome, because very often it's black and brown people that are hemmed up in violent crime, even though the economic situation that causes people to commit crime is often violent, but it's legitimized. So a lot of people, unfortunately, commit certain acts that are very terrible and very antisocial, but brutalizing them further will not bring back their victims, and it will not make them better people. All it will do is give money to the state that profits off of prison slavery.
Violence committed against them by the state since the day that they were born. Poverty is violent. Economic exploitation is violent. Talk about that violence. Like her, talk about it.
Are identified possibly before it happens.
Restorative justice, not incarceration.
The offenders and the judges that are releasing these people out on the streets with little or no harm. Because quite frankly, $5,000 for murder is ludicrous.
Mr. Mako,
Yes,
you like to speak?
yes, Mr. Hurd. You were sorely mistaken about.
Here you go, here's the microphone.
I can people can hear me fine. That's fine.
Use the microphone, please.
A few minutes ago, you said that you want what everybody else wants. Sir, I think you're sorely mistaken about that. Some of us want justice, a system of justice. And we define a system of justice as one in which no one is mistreated and those who need the most help get the most constructive help. Project Eject is not going to give that to the masses of poor and black people in Jackson, Mississippi. It is a program that looks to criminalize, and as the brother pointed out, he wasn't wrong in what he said, persecute, because this is what this is, a persecution program. You want to talk about let's be civil. At the last week at First Baptist Church, you talked about we need to have civility. But you the one up here talking about throwing people in the cages. We're not talking about throwing people in the cages and ripping them away from their family. But you want to talk about civility. How is that kind of behavior civility? How is condemning people to send them miles and miles away from their family? How is that civility?
Stop that one. Let him finish.
Would you like to have lunch next week?
Would I have lunch for what, sir?
I'm asking, would you like to have lunch next week?
I don't need to have lunch with the
You don't
people.
want to have something?
No. We need the whole court open every time and in the public. We don't need to have any backdoor conversations.
Nope.
Everything gonna be done right in front of the people where the people can have a voice and everybody can have a say in it. There's no need for personal meetings between me and you. I said everything I had to say about EJ in a public forum. I said it in the Jackson Free Press, and I've been here at the last three meetings. And if we want to have a dialogue about the issues and deal with them, me and you can have a dialogue with the people right now.
And we are.
How many people in this room have been incarcerated, by the way? Like, how many people here are actually the people that are subject to incarceration and that will be the victims of Project Eject? Because I see a lot of white faces. I see a lot of people who seem very chill right now and don't. What?
Obey the law.
The same law that told my grandmother's grandmother that it was illegal for her to read. The same law that let my grandmother's grandmother watch people rape her children in front of her, and then she has to serve tea to the people who do that. Legality has nothing to do with morality. Obey the law. There's nothing that the state can do to heal you. Not let him walk, but not put him in a cage. Restorative justice. Restorative justice.
Sir, y'all we got the next speaker, please.
Compassion.
Did you see him kill? You thought you did, ma'am. You jumping to conclusions. You jumping based on what the news said, ma'am. See, you sitting up and talking about a boy.
Please sit down.
Oh,
We
man,
have
so
next.
this is racist language.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm a resident of Ward 1. I'm also a resident of Precinct 37, which is where we are now. And I have a couple of questions for you. Mr. Hurst, are you seeking public office? problem that we have here in Mississippi is what the legislature has created over the decades. And one of the things about guns is that a bill was passed recently in the legislature that expanded the proliferation of guns to include also carrying them in church. We could have guns here, you know, if we wanted to. Maybe somebody does have a gun here in church. Those kinds of things are ridiculous. We are imposing on our population not only guns all over the place, but also poverty. When this legislature refuses to enact livable wages for people here, people get frustrated. And if we go by the statistics from the U.S. Department of Labor on the low unemployment rate, I challenge that because it's not even true to begin with. Because what happens when an unemployed person times out, they fall out of the system and they are not counted. We have a lot of people here who do not have jobs, despite what the administration says, people that are seeking employment or have given up that are not even counted by the U.S. Department of Labor. And I know that for a fact. That's been a fact for decades. And I think that you need to think about that. Locking people up is not solving the problem that we have here in Jackson. We have a lot of unemployed people here. We have an education system that is struggling, and thank goodness the voters here in Jackson agreed to the recent proposition on the ballot, but that is not dealing with the problem of education. The problem of education begins again with the legislature when it refuses to properly fund education and belittles teachers and kids in the process. And that needs to change. That legislature needs to change. The Republicans need to change and stop this white supremacist attitude to black folks, brown folks, and others that live here in Jackson or want to live here in Jackson. And what are you talking about when it comes to immigration?
Tell us how we can do a better job of enforcing federal criminal law.
Well, what you have to do is support legislation that will give us a living wage, support legislation that will properly fund our school system and give kids something to look forward to.
We're the executive branch. We don't have any power over the purse.
You have a power of influence like you're attempting to do here with your proposition. You're trying to influence what we think about our police department in the city of Jackson.
Sir?
That's what you're doing with Eject. You're campaigning. You're campaigning like any
I'm not
politician.
campaigning on anything. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do what we can do.
Well, I want to know, what is your position?
Unjust laws need not be enforced.
Sir?
Amen.
I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. We got another question.
Well, when it's too hard for you to answer, you pass the microphone, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's off.
I'm sorry. What's the third question, ma'am?
The second was,
I got it. Yeah, I got the second. Third one, you said? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
some of those things are extremely poverty, a failing public school system, lack of resources for those who want to get jobs or who want to do something different. Because it's my belief that violent crime is not something that just falls from the sky. It's something that people do sometimes because they feel they have no other choice. And we should give them
How will this be different? Well, in the past, I think you said that it was questionable whether these total crime possibly worked. I think when Project Safe Neighborhoods was done back in the late 2000s, the study from Michigan State University that showed that in cities that it was implemented, it reduced crime from anywhere from 4% to 42%.
Effective motive. The least effective. Now, if we want to be effective in preventing crime, we need prevention. The number one in your 4-part program needs to be emphasized in all respects. All respects. I'm talking about universal preschool. I'm talking about Head Start. I'm talking about free daycare. I'm talking about parent training. I'm talking about emphasizing bringing up children the way they should be brought up. That will be more effective. Think about the cost of incarcerating people versus raising them well from the beginning.
Jefferson Sessions don't believe in it, and that's what this man represents. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions is about raising God.
But here we go. The point is, once someone is broken, it's much harder to fix them than it is to get it right, to help them grow and learn and become good people. We need to emphasize number one more than any of the others. It's already too late when you incarcerate someone. And even if you do incarcerate them, all you're doing is you're removing them from society. Okay? If you don't actually try to rehabilitate them, there's no point. There's no point. They have a point that if you're going to incarcerate someone, you must rehabilitate them. Yes. But I can tell you as a psychologist, the damage is done. The opportunity exists in early childhood. Thanks.
Thank you. So, in the back there, we got time for 2 more questions. You and then you. We'll be around if you have some additional questions.
Pay these people 50 cents an hour for their labor that they can't put on a resume once they become re-entry people. That they build these prisons, they gotta fill these prisons, and when you take someone away from their family and these important relationships that get destroyed, and people are subjected to a life of physical, emotional, and sexual violence in a cage, they come out traumatized, they can't bond with these families they've been torn away from, but because we have somebody smile at them in school, everything's going to be better? And I don't want to disrespect the woman whose child was murdered, but being brutal,
you have shown me no respect.
and I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
you have interrupted. You have not even expressed any kind of...
I have family that have been murdered, and I have family that are murderers. And they are both my family, they are both hurting, they both need to heal, and it's more than booklets and textbooks and smiles in schools, and it's more than encaging someone where they're likely to be brutalized severely to the degree to which you cannot fathom, and anyone who's not been incarcerated can fathom. And there is no crime that deserves what you experience in the prisons in this country.
Go ahead. Thank you for your patience.
Good lives. Prison House of Nation.
My name is Hugh Hollowell. I'm the community pastor at Open Door Mennonite Church in South Jackson. And there are people in our neighborhood, in the neighborhood of my church, who go to prison. And as their pastor, it is my job to help support them, to support their family while they're gone. And so sometimes that looks like giving someone a ride to Yazoo City because they don't have the economic resources to get there. It's much harder to support someone when they're in Arkansas or when they're in Texas or Alabama. And I notice on your point, if I were a senator, I would note that under prevention you have 1 point, but under prosecution you have 5 points. Regardless of that, sir, I know from experience, point 3A, coordinate government agencies to assist with reentry, one of the first things those social workers are going to ask the person about to be reintegrated, to use your word, is what does your support system look like?
Yep.
Are you in contact with your family? Do you have some family member you can live with when you go back home? Well, they probably would have if they've been able to see them for the last couple of years. Instead, what this project does is it systematically isolates people from the community.
And that's their
Community
goal.
is everything we need to live a good life. And by isolating people from their community, the people least likely to be able to access their community are people with low economic means. This project targets people with low economic means and deliberately isolates them from their community. And I wasn't going to say anything, but the reason maybe the reason people end up back on the streets after they're arrested is because according to the Constitution, they're still innocent. I'm a product of the Mississippi public education system, but I had to have civics to graduate. And they taught me that we're innocent until we're proven guilty in a court of law before a jury of our peers. But it's the policy of the federal government to assume guilt.
No, we haven't assumed guilt.
No, they just assume
community. The statutes passed by Congress says they shall be locked up.
A danger to whose community?
Now, you can address that with Congress. Our job is to enforce